There you go.
Well, good evening. This is Gary Borgendale, and we're back for another interview this evening with the Alpha News Minnesota and with First Tuesday Conservative. Again, I'm Gary Borgendale and work with Serial Media here in the Twin Cities. And joining us all the way from the Peach State of Georgia is AJ Kaufman, who is on kind of his own special assignment down there. So AJ, welcome to First Tuesday Alpha News Conversations tonight.
Hey, Gary, good evening. Thank you. And thanks to everyone for setting this up on such short notice. I hope it'll be beneficial to everyone.
So you are in Georgia now. So what prompted you to head down to Georgia to see what was going on down there?
Well, it's no denying it's the most important Senate election of the year. Some might say of the past 20 years, some might say ever. And it's not hyperbolic to say that. This is for control of the U.S. Senate at a time when the Democrats have control of the House and control of the Oval Office coming up in about 3 weeks. So to just kind of have divided government and have a check on whatever President-elect and soon-to-be President Biden and the House and others want to do, the Republicans just need to hold one of these seats, preferably two, and it's extremely important, and everyone seems to know that, even people who aren't always as attuned to politics as others. So it's vital down here, and there's a lot of energy on the ground.
Well, tell us about that. You've attended some rallies down there, so let's talk about some of the rallies that you've attended and how that is working during the Senate runoff race in Georgia.
Well, today I was down just outside of Atlanta. I was in a few places today, but the rally I attended was just outside of Atlanta in a town called Noonan. And there had about 300 people, which, considering Senator Loeffler, who was speaking, considering she's doing 3 or 4 rallies each day, is a pretty good turnout on a weekday. It was 61 degrees, just to rub it in the faces of those of you up in Minnesota.
It is snowing in Minnesota, by the way.
Yeah, I heard. I timed the trip pretty well. I probably wouldn't come down here in June or July as easily. But it was nice out, and but people have been turning out, they said, for her rallies, anywhere from 100 to 500 people, similar for Senator David Perdue. And, you know, it was a crowd that you'd expect, slightly older crowd, but certainly very much in tune, lots of shirts, lots of patriotism, lots of cheering, and a pretty good 15-20 minute stump speech she delivered. And the few people I talked to are cautiously optimistic, but it's going to be a very, very close race. Both of them are going to be.
So do you have any idea of momentum going one way or the other, or is it just kind of being consistent where it's at?
Well, there's limited polling because of the situation back in November. Republicans certainly, and even Democrats, are a little skeptical of taking too much interest in the polls, and there haven't been as many. But there seems to be an agreement that it's going to be a very close race. Some people say the Democrats have a little momentum. You know, they're going to need it because, of course, at least Senator Perdue did defeat Jon Ossoff by almost 100,000 votes last month. So that needs to be made up. And a libertarian candidate will also not be on the ticket, which usually helps the Republicans in a runoff like this. And as far as Senator Loeffler and Raphael Warnock, it's going to be close. What can I tell you? No one's making predictions. I definitely don't see either side that is going to overplay their cards and say we're going to win going away, because the state is purple.
So can you see if President Trump has any impact, or President-elect Biden has any impact down in the races down there?
I don't think that Joe Biden has much effect down here. He doesn't seem to be talked about much. President Trump will be in Dalton, Georgia, which is not far from where I'm sitting in the northwestern part of the state, Monday night for what should be a big rally the evening before the actual election. And he's mentioned a lot. Well, Loeffler and Warnock are not reluctant at all to bring up the president. They are loyalists, and they are tying themselves to him for better or worse, hopefully better when it comes to Republican voters. And you could see almost as many Trump t-shirts at the rally today as for the senators. So I think, this is it's a purple state, but in the areas where Republicans need to turn out, which would be more the rural areas and the ex-urban areas, people are supportive of the president. And I think that's why the two senators are in sync with him.
This is Gary Borgendale with Alpha News MN and First Tuesday Conservatives. So thanks to both of those organizations for helping us put this together. And we're talking with AJ Kaufman, one of the writers for Alpha News MN, about what is taking place in Georgia. Just for our viewers and listeners, explain why are there two Senate races in Georgia as opposed to just one?
Well, there's a special, the Kelly Loeffler, Raphael Warnock is a special election. There was a Senator, Johnny Isakson, Republican, who resigned a little over a year ago, I believe. And Governor Kemp appointed Loeffler to his seat. And thus that necessitated a special election. She had to go through a primary, which essentially the primary occurred on election day. Now, and she and the Democrat Warnock received the most votes. So they are the ones who proceeded on to the January runoff. The other election is a standard US Senate elections. Senator David Perdue, first term senator, former businessman. He is running against John Ossoff, 33 years old, would be the youngest member of Senate. And that is just a typical election, but no one got to the magical 50% mark because of the Libertarian candidate and other candidates. Perdue got very close, 49.8, something like that. And Ossoff was around 47. So in any other situation, any other state, I believe, except for maybe Louisiana and a couple others, Perdue would have already been declared the winner, but you have to get 50% in this kind of election in Georgia. So therefore, here we go.
So when you were at the rallies, and did you talk to some of the people then that were just voters? How were they feeling about what was going on as just the voters, not the party people, but the voters that were there in attendance?
Yeah, I always make a point to talk to the voters. You can only get so much from party people, especially if they're on the campaign. But the voters, they're very concerned about election integrity here after what occurred last month in Georgia. There's obviously been a well-covered controversy about ballots and how things were handled by ballot counters, by local officials. And the hope amongst conservatives is that all these people will turn out and not be skeptical and not hold a grudge and turn out to vote for the Republicans and hopefully preserve some of President Trump's legacy during the next 2 to 4 years. But they're concerned, and they're concerned about mail-in voting, and they're concerned about the Atlanta machine. There's some similarities we can get into later between Georgia and Minnesota in terms of having a large left-leaning urban center, and then the rest of the state, which leans right. So the people are, again, cautiously optimistic, skeptical, a little bit jaded. Talked to mostly Republican voters today.
Okay.
But, they're all, the ones I talked to are all voting certainly, or already have voted. They've had early voting for over 2 weeks here.
So have you talked to any Democrat voters?
I have. Yeah, I made a point to try to get into the Atlanta corridor where you might find a few more, some areas. And, you can kind of, you can go into a hipster coffee shop and be likely to find someone who's a Democrat. You can go to a college town, or you can just, talk to people and see what happens. And I did talk to someone, and I wrote down their quote, which may or may not be included in a future article. But they're talking about, totally different issues than Republicans are, as you might expect. It's always interesting to me. The Republicans are talking about, the far left nature of their opponents and about preserving, funding the police and supporting our troops and pro-life and fiscal conservatism and smaller government. And the Democrats are talking about how both candidates on the Republican side are they're both successful, wealthy business people. And so when you're a successful, wealthy business person, especially when you're a woman, I think Loeffler, they've said it, an attractive woman who married an older, wealthy man, she gets criticized by liberals and the media a lot more, I think, than other people would. She owns part of a basketball team that is campaigning against her. She's considered, a thief. She's considered corrupt. She wants tax cuts only for the rich. She wants to cut funding for education, the usual pablum that goes out. Right. And the Democrats are also talking about healthcare, and they're still talking about how Republicans are going to take away care for pre-existing conditions. And I did find my quote here. I was looking for what I wrote down earlier. One woman told me the runoffs are about healthcare and social justice. She said, I've lived here my entire life. Change is not easy, but this is our moment. It's within our power to change the state and the country. It's straight out of the playbook. You know, I'm not trying to pick on her, but that is a standard reply you would get from a, pretty liberal Democrat.
So have you listened to or watched any of the media down there?
Listen to it more. When you drive, you have a chance to listen. And I try to alternate between what seemed like a conservative talk radio station and a mainstream one. The commercials are all different. Obviously, you've got the local media, which would say they're balanced, but doesn't always seem that way, or fact checking, every event that Purdue and Loeffler have. They seem to be fact checking their comments. They don't seem to be as concerned with Warnock's sort of Marxist, radical, often anti-American, occasionally anti-Semitic policies, and John Ossoff's just ties to China and his pretty extreme left-wing views on most things, and his youth and inexperience, frankly, as they do with the Republicans. The billboards are interesting. I think it's been covered on cable news, but there's a Democratic group that has a billboard, or quite a few billboards. I think I saw 4 or 5 of them around Metro Atlanta, that have a picture of the Republican candidates, and it says that Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue did not stand with Trump, so don't stand with them and don't vote for them. Which is, it makes the appearance that it's coming from a Republican group, maybe a dissatisfied Republican group, but it's from a left-leaning group, and it's extremely misleading, because if any 2 senators have stood with President Trump for the past 2 months and beyond, it's these 2, and so that doesn't seem to be true to me.
Just to give you a little perspective of the spending going on, I think this was even a few days ago, $365 million has already been spent. Another $110 million is already earmarked to be spent. So by this over, we'll probably have $500 million spent in a Senate election race.
Understandable. I mean, it's the biggest race, and I think 85% of the donations to Ossoff in particular come from out of state. There's and Hollywood is big in Georgia. They've got their studios here, so they're coming in from out of state. And, both parties know that things are on the line here. So there's a lot of money, of course, going into it.
So how long are you going to be down there then, AJ?
I'm just going to be down there till tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to start heading north. It'll take about a day and a half, 2 days to get back by car. But I've been down here since I've lost track of the day, since yesterday midday. So just 48 hours on the ground is enough. I'm able to cover quite a bit of territory with the good weather and the good roads, and moving fast from place to place and talking with people and getting the notes taken and pictures and then moving on. But I'm always willing to stick around longer, or even talk to people as I move north if they have any opinions on the Senate race.
So then how do you position yourself then as a writer for Alpha News MN, or how do you position of who you are when you're down there?
Well, I went to a few party county offices for the parties, Republican and Democrat. I tell them I'm a journalist from Minnesota. If it comes up, I mention Alpha News. Certainly it's going to be, there's nothing in the name that makes people think there's a partisan slant to it. But if they went to the website, we are a right-leaning populist website, most of our content. But I try to be pretty mainstream when I'm talking to the people. I'm not showing any partisan side. I'm just asking them questions and writing down answers. So I introduced myself as just a journalist from Minnesota, which they're all interested to hear, because there are out-of-state journalists in town, but most of them are working for perhaps bigger networks and coming from New York or DC or somewhere like that. So they seem pretty happy to talk to me today. Got quite a few conversations with party officials at the rally, and also beforehand stopping by a few county offices in different parts of the state.
So what do you sense how do you sense the outcome will be? Will it be that close that it'll just be the last votes come in will make that difference?
I think so. I think you're gonna, if it's going to be within 1%, which I think it will be 1.5%, there's going to be recounts involved. I'm sure both sides are gearing up for that. You've got Stacey Abrams on one side, who's been trying to turn out the vote, but also has a history of not accepting election results from 2 years ago when she ran for governor. and the Republicans are going to be pretty feisty if things tilt the Democrats' way at the end by just a few votes again. So I think it's going to be, I don't know anyone who doesn't think it's going to be extremely close. This is a state that went 12,000 votes allegedly for Joe Biden last month, and I don't see why it wouldn't be in that same range, if not closer, for these two races.
Well, we do have one question that came up in our chat, and if you would like to have more questions of our guest, AJ Kaufman, go ahead and put those in the chat box there. But Andrew Yang called for Democrats moving to Georgia to vote for the Senate seats. Any evidence of this happening?
I heard about that when it happened a month ago. It's illegal to do. And the Secretary of State, who's been maligned by the conservatives, has taken these people to task and is going to make sure this doesn't happen to the best of his ability, I assume. There's a lot of rules, there's a lot of legalities. You have to have been in the state for a certain amount of days. I'm not naive. I don't deny there's a way that some people are going to try to do that, maybe even from both sides, but I think it's going to be minimal at best. But it certainly is a devious plan. And Yang, who tends to be, he's to the left, but he's pretty honest. And I think he meant it when he said it, but he sort of backtracked a little bit afterwards.
Have you been received well down there, or have you been threatened or anything like that in any places that you've gone?
No, I mean, I'm not walking around carrying a Trump sign or anything like that. I mean, there's so many Northern transplants living here now. I'd say the majority of people that I met at county office today, at some point in their lives, came to Georgia from Illinois, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, what have you. This is not the South, at least around the Atlanta area and in the sort of the northern part of the state and the larger cities. This is not, it doesn't feel like the South. And I've been through rural parts of Mississippi and Arkansas and Alabama and Louisiana that feel a lot more Southern than most of Georgia these days.
Well, very interesting about what's going on. We're talking with AJ Kaufman from Alpha News MN, who's been down in Georgia for 48 hours and is about ready to be heading back there tomorrow with the Senate race. And that, when is that Senate race coming up again? When is that final?
It's going to be on January 5th, which I believe is a week from today.
Yes. And then they'll see how close there are. And I think is there within a 0.5% that it would be called for a runoff, right? Or not a runoff, but a recount?
I think so. I haven't actually looked that up completely, but certainly if it's within a certain amount of votes, they're going to do a recount. And again, I would be shocked if there weren't at least some sort of an initial recount with this race, because there's too much at stake. It's going to be too close, and there's two races. So I would say that, the Senate and then the new House members, and they all come to Washington, I think on Monday, even before this election, but this may drag on a bit, like we've seen in the past with Al Franken about a dozen years ago. I've
heard of that race too. Yes,
and others.
So, do you see it's going to be a Republican vote and a Democrat vote? Do you see any split votes coming out of this?
That's a great question. I was thinking about that today. Probably not. These candidates, both sides, to be fair, are not moderates. Warnock would probably go down as the most left-wing member of the Senate if he won, along with probably Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Ossoff is extremely left-wing. So and these two candidates, Loeffler and Perdue, they're pretty conservative. They're not making any bones about it. They're checking all the boxes. So I can't imagine. What I wonder about is if some people will vote for one of their candidates and then just discard the other one. I've heard rumors about certain Black voters who are going to vote for Warnock, but Ossoff being kind of what's the best way to put it? Sort of an urban hipster, metrosexual kind of young millennial guy, rich kid from suburban Atlanta who went to school at the best schools. Whether he appeals to rural voters, African-American voters, Hispanics is a question. So there might be some people who are left-leaning who check the box for Warnock, but aren't going to do it for Ossoff. I don't know that they'd vote for Perdue. As far as Republicans go, I would think that they're going to vote for both candidates, and I don't see that much ticket splitting. I can't imagine.
So has there been much of other senators down there, like Mitch McConnell or Chuck Schumer, campaigning down there?
I don't think that they have, at one of the county headquarters, I ran into a gentleman wearing a Mitch McConnell sweatshirt, which is quite a thing. Those are probably hard to come by. And he was there from the NRSC, National Republican Senatorial Committee. He was there kind of going county to county and had his laptop out and was just kind of monitoring what's going on. So he's down there, and there are surrogates. Loeffler had a congressman from Texas with her today. Elise Stefanik, a young woman from upstate New York, congresswoman is down here. Nikki Haley's been down here. Marco Rubio's been down here. Lindsey Graham. And then the Democrats have had a few people, but they have their state machine with Stacey Abrams kind of moving things around too. So yeah, there's been out-of-state people. I don't think the leadership has been down. They're busy dealing with a lot of other things in DC, it seems like. So, but certainly they're trying to get out more their popular senators and congressmen that can encourage people to vote.
Yeah, that's what, seeing more and more of that. There's a lot of things going on, votes in DC, so that keeps a lot of those away from that standpoint too. So how would you see what you're seeing in Georgia, Atlanta, and the like with Minnesota in the comparison to our states?
I mentioned this a couple times to people today, and I've noticed it. I tend to travel and study up on these things, but I noticed it even again today. It's a very similar state to Minnesota in terms of political demographics, if you will. Atlanta wasn't always the case. Atlanta used to be a little more moderate, but Atlanta is extremely left-wing city. It would, clearly resemble Minneapolis, St. Paul in many ways, 75% Democrat voters. The suburbs until recently would have been a little more mixed, but the suburbs are becoming more liberal, especially the wealthier suburbs. It's a clear break when you start leaving the suburbs and exurbs in terms of the signs you see. I drove down the back roads from up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is right on the border, to Rome, Georgia, which is about halfway to Atlanta, and then continued on. And it would have been 500 to 1, I'd say, signs for the Republicans over the Democrats. That's a very conservative area. They're congressmen, congresswomen, they're Republicans. They went 80%, most of those counties, for Trump and for Perdue. But as soon as you get to the suburbs, it gets a little more mixed. And as you get toward the city, just the signs, the billboards, it all changes. So it's similar. The only difference would be they have, I don't know if I'd say it's similar, because I was going to say it's Savannah, Macon, and some of the other cities in Georgia, which are maybe a little bit more to the center left. But we've got Rochester and Duluth and St. Cloud and others that are probably fairly similar.
Same way.
Yeah, larger African-American population. That's one difference. There are, in the rural areas of Minnesota, you won't find as many African-American voters as you will in rural parts of Georgia. Right. So there'd be a little more of probably a Democrat flavor in smaller towns down here than you'd find up north.
Did you have any conversation relative to the presidential election and Trump losing supposedly in Georgia?
I didn't broach the subject. It's been 2 months, and I think people are focusing on this election, but there's certainly a lot of the Trump signs are everywhere still in people's houses. Those haven't come down. A few Stop the Steal signs, and people, they're relating this election to that one, talking about the concerns about fraud and things of that nature. And of course, they're happy that he's coming down next week, and hoping that he came down a month ago for a rally, and he did spend a majority of his time, rehashing the November 3rd election, perhaps understandably. But this time it seemed like people were saying they're hoping that he spends the majority of time on the senatorial election when he comes here on Monday night.
Yeah, as opposed to himself. And if he campaigns just on behalf of the senators, then I think that's a lot stronger for them. There could be some negative coattails if he starts talking about how much the steal and all those things, I think would detract from the senators in the election there.
Yeah, you don't. The whole idea is it's the first time I've heard Republicans say in a while, turn out. If voters come out, if voters turn out, we're going to win. Usually you hear that more from a Bernie Sanders or someone on the left looking for higher turnout, but because Georgia, I believe, I could be wrong, has more registered Republicans, or certainly they believe there's more Republican and conservative voters in Georgia than liberal Democrats. most people I talked to, including Loeffler's campaign manager today, said, if turnout is high, we believe we will win. So they want people to vote now and all the way through Thursday, when I think the early voting ends, and they want people to come out, and especially in the rural areas, because these rural counties that went 80% for Trump and Purdue, they don't have very high turnout still, barely 50% in some of these.
So let me ask you a question.
An 80-20 Republican.
If they didn't vote in the general election, and yet they are still a registered voter, are they able to vote in this runoff election?
Yes, I would. I don't see why not. I would, if they're a registered voter, yes.
So it'd be very interesting to see that you could I think, be able to see who voted or didn't vote in the general election by this time. And for sure, you're going out to get those people out to vote. I think we have a little spotted internet here, so it looks like AJ has froze a little bit for me. And so this is Gary Borgendale, and we are hosting Alpha News MN along with First Tuesday Conservatives. We're talking about conservative topics that impact us here in Minnesota. And one of those major ones is the runoff election in Georgia. And AJ has been down there for 48 hours getting an impact of what is going on. And it looks like I lost him there, so maybe he'll try and get connected back on. But I want to encourage you to go to Alpha News MN to read some of AJ's articles and others as well. You get a good feel for what that conservative side of news is in Minnesota. And also too, that they are also looking for your financial support. So I encourage you to go to alphanewsmn.com, and that you'll be able to read some of those articles and hopefully be able to contribute to them as well. They're an independent source, and so they rely on contributions from viewers such as yourself to be able to keep the operations going. AJ just left me a note here. There's a new story that will be posted tomorrow for him, and so with his comments relative to what's going on in Georgia. So that will be good. New story will be posted early tomorrow morning from AJ Kaufman at alphanewsmn.com, and you'll be able to get it from there. Well, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get AJ back online with us, but I'll just share a little bit more too about First Tuesday Conservatives, really under the leadership with Scott Nitzel. And Scott has done a great job of reaching different people to have conversations with. And by the way, I will be doing another one of these on January 11th at 6:30. That's Monday, January 11th. And I'll have Dr. Scott Jensen on, and we'll be talking about COVID, the vaccine, and more. I'm sure I'm going to be diving in a little bit to how things have been recorded here in Minnesota, and to make sure what is the accuracy of what the number of people that have actually died here in Minnesota. So stay tuned for that. That's Monday, January 11th at 6:30 with Dr. Scott Jensen. We'll discuss more about COVID and the vaccine. So we'll talk there. And by the way, look at this. He's back. That's one of the things of being in a hotel. You have kind of spotted internet with all the media folks down there. So
I blame the hotel, and I will not mention the hotel's name.
Okay, that's safe to say. That's safe to say. I was just talking about that you've got some articles coming out. So why don't you share a little bit about, you have one out already on the Georgia election then, AJ?
Yeah, last night when I got back here to the hotel, I wrote a short article kind of previewing what was going to go on this week and where I was going to be and kind of where the races are. And then tomorrow morning, there will be an article recapping today. And then there'll be another article that I'll write at some point tomorrow evening, probably, that will hopefully get up there sometime on Thursday to go over the two races, probably separate articles, one for each race.
One for the Loeffler and one for Purdue then?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we want to touch base with this. AJ, any other things that really are stepping out for you that you want to share with the listeners and viewers this evening?
Well, it's it's this election is rather important. I know people that are watching, probably very few people that are on watching this can vote in Georgia, and they shouldn't vote in Georgia if they're not a resident.
Thank
But
you for towing the legal line there. That's good,
yeah,
AJ.
exactly. We got to make sure no one hears the wrong thing. But it was a 12,000 vote separation here last month, and it was as close as any state, along with Arizona and Wisconsin, I believe. The Senate is a check on the president. Even if the Republicans do lose both, it'll be 50-50, but with the vice president, who I do not call by name, it would be tough for Republicans to get anything done. And the Democrats could, if they can convince the few moderates they have left, pass some of the more, I would say, disastrous and dangerous policies, from court packing to statehood for DC to whatever it might be. So I hope the president comes down here and can convince more people to come out to vote. I know Republicans are hoping for a big turnout on election day. Democrats tend to vote early. We saw that. Republicans tend to be more inclined to vote on the day of the election. I would warn people, much like last month, don't get too excited if the Republicans are shown to be leading on election night, because there are mail-in votes. And maybe there are shenanigans, but nonetheless, there are mail-in votes. And it seems like Republicans have to have a decent lead to cover what happens late in the election night and the next day or two. So look, the candidates are who they are. I was having this conversation today with a conservative friend of mine. Ideally, you'd like to have, a young, energetic, not going to name names, but we have some senators that probably are better campaigners and better speakers on the stump and more appealing to a range of voters. But the Democrats are running two extremely left-wing candidates, and one is very young and inexperienced and has no connection really to the working folks of Georgia, and the other is very far left, is a Marxist who has a whole trail of history of speeches and actions and legal problems. And so to preserve the legacy of the president and preserve conservative values, you hope that the Republicans get their act together and come to vote. I don't know why anyone who cares about the country, the state of Georgia in the future, if they are conservative leaning, or if they're frankly moderate or independent, wouldn't come out and vote in this election.
One of the things I've noticed in my own personal emails is the request for money to be going in. Is like I'm getting probably half a dozen emails and probably half a dozen texts every day. Give money because we're down to the last straws. We need to have money down here. And also I was on a call with Heritage Action, and they're talking about going down the streets, working on the streets and getting voters out there. And Black Lives Matter was just on the same street. Have you come across any of those national organizations and what they're down there and trying to do, AJ?
No, there was one protester at the event today that I went to, kind of a young kid with a I think it was a red shirt that I believe said something about Georgia Democrats and a sign saying prison for Loeffler or prison for Purdue or something. And he just kind of walked up there and they kind of pushed him aside, that so she could walk down the sidewalk to the event. I haven't, but I didn't get too deep into the urban areas or what have you, or the college towns. But it's John Ossoff has some problems with his ties to China. He has some problems with his ties to some Middle Eastern companies. He's an investigative journalist, which I suppose I consider myself the same, but I would probably never call myself that if I were running for Congress. He's also some sort of a filmmaker, good for him. His father was a lifelong Democrat donor. He came from a privileged background in the suburbs, but he's got some issues business-wise, and he can turn out wealthy suburban people and people from Emory University and some of the liberal areas. But I personally, I don't make predictions, but it's hard to see how he can get enough votes, because he needs 100,000 extra he didn't get last time. And so I'd probably be a little more confident in David Perdue. He's got a little more name recognition. He got almost half of the Hispanic vote last month,
Okay.
according to exit
Yeah.
poll. Hispanics are about 10% of Georgia's population, so it's not California or Texas or Florida, but it's also not Minnesota or Wisconsin.
Correct.
And they're trying to reach out to those groups. I did talk to the party county chair up in Cobb County, which is a suburb, and the GOP headquarters are actually in a strip mall that is pretty much Mexican restaurant, Mexican grocery store, clothing store, what have you. So I don't know if they purposely picked that spot, but they're trying to reach out to the Hispanic community because every vote matters, and a couple 100,000 votes there possibly.
So we have a lot of listeners here in Minnesota and maybe a few other places out there. So are there certain things that non-residents of Georgia can do relative to this election?
Can donate money, I suppose. They can. Everyone seems to have a family member or a friend in Georgia because they've had so many transplants down there. You can tell your uncle or your aunt, your cousin or your friend who moved down to Atlanta to go out and vote or campaign. You can, those are the two main things I would do from out of state.
I also know that with some of the campaign, not the campaigns for the candidates themselves, but the different political action organizations, that you can join up with them, and they'll give you a call list that you can actually call from your phone to encourage people to vote as well. So just kind of reaching out to those different organizations would be Heritage Action, Family Research Council Action, Faith and Freedom, Ralph Reed's organization. So there's quite a few of those organizations. If you're connected with, you might be able to help there as well. And as a follower of Christ, then there's opportunities to pray for that as well down there. One of the things I did come across, this is really comes to a pro-life issue too, because of where Loeffler and Purdue are from a pro-life standpoint and where the opponents are. And so that is ground central for the pro-life issues going forward. And hopefully the two Republicans are able to come through and maintain that victory that way. AJ, I think we're about ready to wrap up here. So you have your articles coming out tomorrow, and probably the next day, or that we'll be talking about both the Loeffler and Purdue. Any other articles that you've got on the horizon that are coming out for Alpha News MN, AJ?
Well, I try to get 2 or 3 articles a week. This week they'll be on the election, but I've had some articles analyzing the cabinet choices for Joe Biden.
Okay.
And as soon as he nominates an attorney general, which would be the big one, I'll have something on that. He's also trying to decide about a labor secretary, which I don't think it'll be Bernie Sanders, but I do believe it'll be someone pretty radical. So, I would say that, to be perfectly fair, his cabinet, they're obsessed with the identity politics and the first this, the first that, the first female, the first Asian American, and all the interest groups. But a lot of his picks, to me, while they are establishment and continuation of the Obama administration, are not that radical. I know that might not be a popular opinion among conservatives, but he has some people he's chosen, like the HHS secretary nominee, Becerra from California, radically pro-abortion, very left-wing, and a few others. And so we'll see. Labor and attorney general are ones where I think he's going to go left. And especially with all this going on with his son and with labor, that'll be interesting. So I'll have an article on that, maybe 2, depending on when they come out. And then just continue on with whatever's going on currently. And I'm sure I'll have a recap article about this election when it's all decided.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for joining in tonight, AJ Kaufman, and he's a writer for Alpha News MN. My name is Gary Borgendale of Salem Media, filling in for the First Tuesday Conservative and Alpha News MN as we continue our conversation about conservative impact in the United States. Thank you very much. Happy New Year to everybody out there. And tune in. The next one we have scheduled is January 11th, where I'll be hosting Dr. Scott Jensen, and we'll be talking about COVID, the vaccination, and where we go from there. Thanks very much, AJ. Have a good night.
Thank you.